It is what can hold the land in community, in perpetuity to save it and protect it, but also give farmers the most autonomy and independence on the land. And as farmers, like, we know that's what farmers want. They want long-term security and they want independence and they want to be able to do whatever they want to do in their day-to-day business operations. And unfortunately, in our culture, the only way we know how to talk about that right now is through private property. But there's another way. Like, this is another way. And these legal structures give people that. It gives them everything they want out of that private property ownership, while also bringing them a network of support and community. People are meant to live in community. People are meant to farm in community. And so how can we do all of this within the legal structures that exist today? And that is what we're doing with the Farmers Land Trust and the Farmland Common.
Welcome back to Season 3 of Collab Farm, the podcast that explores all of the ways farmers are working together in collaboration, both formal and informal, to lighten the load of farming. I'm the host, Jackson Rolette, coming off of an extended hiatus, working behind the scenes on all the nerdy no-till grower stuff that you love, plus some super rat updates that we'll be announcing soon, so just sit tight. I'm not going to keep you any longer from this first episode because it is so incredible. This is one of my favorite organizations on the planet. And I talked with the amazing folks, Ian and Kristina from the Farmers Land Trust. Now, you heard Kristina at the top of the show. The Farmers Land Trust is responsible for creating and supporting Farmland Commons, a vehicle for preserving farmland and ensuring its dedication to regenerative agriculture and perpetuity, while respecting both farmers and the communities they feed. I mean, what's better than that? If you like what you hear, are a farmer or a landholder, you can reach out to them at thefarmerslandtrust.org. Real quick, though, let's get a word from this episode's show sponsors. This episode is brought to you by the OSC PAC Pact. The OSC PAC Pact, which is very difficult to say, it's PACKPACT, is a collective action campaign that works to reduce single-use packaging in the natural products industry. Very important. They inspire innovators to minimize waste while raising consciousness about the environmental impact of our choices. They empower brands, packaging manufacturers, and consumers to take action. When you take the PAC Pact, you pledge to make progress around circular packaging. You'll also receive a discount code to shop select products from leading natural product brands that you love. Click the link in the show notes to join the PAC Pact. This episode is also brought to you by Grow Organic. In our no-till community, we understand that quality growing supplies and selection make all the difference. As the nation's largest independent retailer dedicated to regenerative and sustainable agriculture, Peace Valley Farm and Garden Supply is your one-stop shop, offering 5,000 reliable products, including cover crops, soil amendments, tools, and more. Serving market farmers since 1976. It's before I was born. They understand the needs of growers, both big and small. Save 20% on your first order now with code NOTIL24. That's NOTIL24. Apply for a commercial account for year-round savings and dedicated support. Visit groworganic.com/no-till or use the link down in the description to get started today. All right, let's get back to the show. Kristina and Ian, thank you for being on Collab Farm. Just to back up, I usually introduce the guests first, but the Farmers Land Trust is such a unique organization. I thought, Kristina and Ian, you all could introduce the organization. Then we could talk a little bit about your all's personal journey into this work. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Sounds great, Jackson. Yeah, so happy to start. I'm sure I'll miss things, so please fill in, Kristina. But the Farmers Land Trust, we're a nationally focused nonprofit land trust that is doing work to raise awareness, inspire people, and show a path forward towards an innovative and new model in how farmland is owned, how title is held, how access and tenure are conveyed to farmers and farm organizations, and how community, farmers, and the commons come together to share stewardship, share food production, and really share the future ownership interest in farmland. This work is localized to communities. We partner with individuals, organizations, community stakeholders to bring about farmland commons, nonprofit landholding structures. And each one is going to look different. Each farm, each community is different from the next. So overall, there's certain values we bring to this work and embed in the farmland commons model. But uniquely to place, each thing is going to adapt and evolve and look different where it sits.
So you all have particular backgrounds that brought you into this work, because it is exciting work. I'm glad that you think it's exciting because you're doing it, but I think it's exciting to have you on to talk about it. Kristina, what has your background been like? I know you and your partner farm as well. What has that been like, and what has brought you into work with this movement or this organization that is Farmers Land Trust?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I really feel like it's been a lifelong journey. Like, I've gotten here from a lot of personal life experiences. It is kind of hard to talk about, but I think it's important to like share where we all come from and the realities and differences and how we all got here. But I grew up going to food banks a lot. And I lived in a household where my dad was in and out of prison a lot. And my mom was a single mom raising 3 girls and needed a lot of extra support. So I very regularly got food from food banks. And that was just a regular part of my upbringing, was being in and out of food banks, and a lot of canned, processed, stale, sort of old foods, but also so much gratitude for that, being so thankful all the time that we even had that to fill the cabinets and to feed me and my little sisters, so grateful for that. And then, when I turned 18 and I had my own job and I could buy whatever I wanted from the grocery store, I remember just being so struck by how everything in the grocery store felt so fake. Finally, here I am. I'm an adult. I can buy whatever food I want, and I can have access to all the food I want. But it just wasn't nourishing. It didn't do for me what I always thought food abundance and food accessibility would do for me. What's the point in cooking or using a recipe or doing all these things if you can just get whatever you want from wherever you want at all times? It just wasn't fulfilling me the way that I thought. And I was also spending a lot of time volunteering in food banks and soup kitchens and with Food Not Bombs, which is a super radical food emergency food relief organization. And I just, I kept seeing the same people over and over again. Every single week, I would go to these few different organizations, and every place I went, it was the same people over and over again. And I was just really struck by how this lack of access to food is this cycle that perpetuates poverty and essentially oppresses people, and how even if you're not in the situation where you have to go to a food bank to fulfill your food needs, that the other option is largely grocery stores, which give the illusion of options, but also is run and provided for by the same few handful of companies that are doing awful things to degrade our environment, and that the food itself is not highly nutritious. The whole thing, the food paradigm was just, I was becoming so aware and upset, and how can we fix this? We have got to do something different. And it was then that I was like, you know what? The most radical thing I can do is to start a garden and feed myself and share it with other people. And so I did that. I started a garden, and, things like that evolve and get out of hand very quickly. And once you start a garden, you're just hooked. I'm sure everyone feels like that. The thrill of getting to grow food and then eat it from your garden and share it with your friends, or take it to a food bank, or give it to your neighbors. It's riveting. It is, how do you not just become obsessed with that? And one thing led to another. And I was like, okay, this is so great. I'm bringing all this food to a food bank, but what if I could grow more food? What if instead of just this tiny little garden, I could farm? I could grow so much food. So I became super obsessed, and I was like, I need to move to a farm. I need to learn how to farm, grow a ton of food. So I did this all my friends were like, you're crazy. I was living in suburbia in Georgia. It's so crazy. And I was like, I'm going to move to a farm in Tennessee. And all my friends are like, you're out of your mind. And I thought, maybe I am, but what is the alternative? Like, just continue living in the status quo and hope things change. But if we're not changing, how will anything else change around us? I had to do something. So yeah, I moved to this farm, and I thought, I planned, I was like, I'll just stay there for 1 year and I'll learn everything that I need to learn about farming. And then I'll go start a farm. And then after a year came and left, I was like, oh, there's a lot to know about farming. So it actually took me 8 years. After 8 full years, I was like, okay, I'm ready to start a farm. And I'd also fallen in love with this magical man who is a wonderful farmer. And we were growing so much food. We were like farming, pumping so much food out of the land. We were building soil. We were plugged into feeding community. Like, the whole thing was so great. And then, oh, right, we can't afford land. Like, we farm for a living and we grow food, and we're maxed out on land access. We wanted to grow more food than we had land available through lease, and we were never going to be able to afford to buy a farm, ever. Never. That was never going to be in the cards for us. And that is when it was like, all of a sudden, like, oh my God, that's what's happening in this country. Like, no one who farms can afford farmland. And then, like, anything, once you start learning about it and looking into it, you're like, not only can I not afford farmland, but there are so many other inequities and disparities around farmland access, tenure, ownership in this country. Like the fact that 98% of land is owned by white people. That is so grossly unjust. Like, that's not an accident. Like, why are more people not doing things about this? And that is when I shifted focus to this work we're at now, which is securing land for communities to grow food on, because the best way to address food access is to give people land to grow food on.
Yeah, I was laughing because you left one mind-blowing paradigm and entered another unknowingly, and then after another 10 years realized you're kind of in the same paradigm. So yeah, Ian, how did you get into this work?
Similar, kind of very different in some ways and very similar in some ways. That kind of, looking back on my life, it's been a series of kind of careers and events that have led me to be equipped and prepared and ready for where I am now. And following that path, didn't know I would be here, but at the same time, like, it makes perfect sense. And I'm so glad I'm here right now. But so I grew up a really deep, rich connection to family. My family, generations had come at different points in history, settled in kind of Boston and south of Boston. So generations. So I come from immigrants who came here in the 1800s. I come from colonists that came here in the Mayflower. I come from refugees who came here later. And so those stories, family stories, really stuck with me. And a few of those family members long since passed before I was born, this Terrence McSweeney and this Edward Levinson, were lifelong activists for human rights, labor rights, land rights. And so hearing their stories, reading things they wrote really stuck with me. And then kind of it stuck with other family members. So grew up kind of with a family full of activists who are doing different things to move towards and realize justice in different ways for communities they were involved in. So I kind of, that was what I was born into. And I felt from a very early age that we're so disconnected from each other and from land. And we don't talk about that in this country. As Kristina was just sharing, like, the injustice with land holding and land hoarding should be something we take to the streets about. We don't here. In Europe, in recent weeks, there's been protests that have blocked highways, that have blocked federal government buildings. Like, we don't take to the streets for much of anything here in this country. Fortunately, Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street started that in some ways, but we don't for land justice, and we really should. Things are so grossly unjust. So early on, kind of saw that injustice. Like grew up right near this town of Plymouth, so would go to these 4th of July celebrations and all about celebration of Americana and our conquest and silence on the land theft and genocide that took place. And that just really stuck with me from an early age. My sister, growing up, worked at this Plymouth plantation. So that kind of colonist storytelling and kind of the stories told by those who are the perpetrators of violence and theft and genocide is what gets perpetuated in our world. And unfortunately, many people just buy into it. But I didn't. I kind of questioned that from an early age. So saw like the need to reconnect people through land, the need to kind of foundationally look at how we're connected to land, and was trying to find ways to wrestle with that, kind of pathways for a career. My family grew up surrounded by this land that was bought by a corporation, used for silage corn, totally decimated the environment. As I was growing up, I watched that take place. That led to cases, local, then state, then Supreme Court, that changed the Clean Water Act to protect inland waterways. So watch that court case unfold, watch that destruction of land, and watch that take place in the name of agriculture. And that really sunk into me that, agriculture and land hoarding, land holding are used as such separations of people, of community, of people from land. And yet food and land can be such connecting forces. That's what is such a unifying kind of memories, identity, experiences that bind us together in different ways. So how to use and how to work in land and agriculture in ways that are connecting and are counter to the separation that they're used for in so many ways. So thought about that, explored in different ways what I could do. Had a career as a social worker at first. That was all focused on kind of bringing people into the natural world, connecting with land, bringing people out of residential homes, out of hospital settings, out of school settings into the natural world, and seeing that connection, seeing that openness that people had when they got onto land and connected with each other was really inspiring. And yet our healthcare system is just one of those institutions that's so broken in this country and so limiting and so narrow in its focus. And so got burnt out of that, and also thought that it's limiting in what I could do in a bigger sense. So thought that, land ownership, land transfer, capital that's needed for those are such important tools and pieces of knowledge to get towards a change, get towards innovation. So got into real estate, started a brokerage company to blend conservation, agriculture, neighborhood development. From there, got into philanthropy, was hired on as a director of this private foundation focused on farmland conservation, more typical as it started around conservation easements, protecting against that development side, extraction side of things. But as that work grew from a local watershed foundation in 11 towns to then around New Hampshire and then around the country a little bit with the line projects, we tried to kind of push and evolve the projects and the land trusts and nonprofits we worked with through my support, my time to help facilitate projects and bring together people, and then financial capital, grant funding from the foundation to support that innovation. So through that, did a number of kind of creative, innovative projects with land trusts to get beyond just conservation, to think about access and affordability and equity. And so built different kind of one-off projects in different ways, built some community crowdsourced fundraising projects, feeling that looking for new ways to raise capital and build community support is critically important. So from that, learned a lot. From that also got to work with the Temple Wilton Community Farm, which is one of two kind of modern day European white-led CSA farms that started the CSA movement in its current state in 1984. Temple Wilton Community Farm, along with Indian Line Farm in Massachusetts, had helped create this modern version of the CSA, and yet they did not have land security. So it was 24 years into their business that I began to work with them and help them secure their land base. And it was 28 years in, as the farmers are retiring, the founding farmers, and one of the farmers, Trauger Grow, had recently passed away, that we finally secured the farmstead into community ownership. So that really struck me that, while they created this business model or replicated this business model, and there's a lot of traction and success in the CSA model, it's short term, the annual growing season, and it's limited to the business, the food relationship and the interaction with customers. But that those same foundational issues of land tenure, land security, land equity are plaguing this farm and plaguing so many farmers around the country. And until we find ways to address that land relationship, land connection piece, we're just playing on the surface. And every farm is at such a disadvantage until we solve that land piece. So with that, Temple Wilton Farm created this, what we called at that point in time, this community-supported land tenure model, and raised philanthropic capital, raised investment capital, brought together a community, raised the money to acquire the farm into this local community nonprofit structure. The community nonprofit included the farmers on the board, included other community stakeholders, and then it leased the farmstead out to the farm for 99 years. So it gave the farm affordable long-term security, gave the farm equity building components, and it held the farm, the real estate, in this community structure that was greater than, supported by many more than just the farm. So, from that, did a few more projects like that, and then kind of combined that model, that community supported land tenure model, and this crowdsource fundraising with this pilot, this agrarian commons pilot that we launched. We learned a lot from that. And now here we are today, and I'm excited to share more about where we are now.
So you mentioned several different components that led you to the work, like conservation easements and community trusts. If we could back up a second and talk about how a farmland commons is different from things that people may be more familiar with, like conservation easements and community trusts.
So a conservation easement is a tool that restricts what will happen on land. So it takes and holds some of the rights that are part of land ownership. So maybe a conservation easement takes the development rights away from land, or restricts what sort of agriculture. So maybe no confined animal feeding operations. So while it has done a lot to protect land from development, which thank gosh it has. Right now we're losing 2,000 acres of land from agriculture to development every single day. So conservation easements have been a very wonderful and useful tool. The thing about conservation easements is that even after a conservation easement is placed on land, that land is still on the open market. So it is still only available to the highest bidder, to whoever has the most money. And then a conservation easement can do things to restrict what happens on land, but it cannot ensure what will happen on land. So that land still goes on the open market. It's still available to whoever just has the most money. And then it does not ensure active agriculture. It does not ensure food production for local communities. So, our work has been focused on how can we go beyond the conservation easement to not just keep land from development, but to also address access for farmers, affordability for farmers, justice in the way that that land is held and who is having access to that land, and then also the stewardship and equity components that are involved in the work that we do specifically. And then as far as community land trusts go, our work actually very closely resembles a community land trust model, but the community land trust, although it started as a farm-centric, food-focused thing back when it started in 1969 with new communities down in Georgia. It has evolved, and the community land trust movement now is mostly focused on the built environment, on housing and buildings and so forth, and has really turned away from agriculture. And also, the community land trust movement is very often, unfortunately, limited. So whereas the conservation land trust movement has access to national funding, national networks and partners, community land trusts bring so much value in how they're hyper local and how they're very much supporting and building equity within community. But that does keep them from being tied into these national networks, supports, resources, and often funding. So our work is really to go beyond that conservation easement and also to use that community land trust model, but use it that in a way that is focused on agriculture, farming, farmers, and also in a way that interconnects them into a larger national network and movement that then brings that national scope of network and legal partners and real estate and funding and grant opportunities and all the things that a local community may be cut off from to them.
I just add to that a piece, like we get stuck in this country, in this culture, in this belief that everything has to be a binary choice. And it doesn't have to be. And in nature, nothing is. And yet we're always framing things in that way. So in our work, a place that we kind of really focus on that is what's the right scale. You know, there's those that would say local is so important, and those that would say national is so important, or those that would say a single farm or a single project, or how many acres, hundreds of thousands of acres is, you know, and both are needed. Both ends of the scale are needed. But what's really needed, we feel, is some kind of integrating the two together. So in our work, the Farmland Commons, we're very hyper local on individual farms connected to communities that are these farmland commons, that are maybe a food shed scale or a market-based scale for farmers to think about. But that in and of itself is not enough, that it needs connection to regional and national supports, partners in different ways. In the same way that a national organization thinking it can just do local work or put a kind of a field agent out in certain parts of the country is such a narrow, limited perspective. Like, national organizations are never going to be local to place. Like, it has to be the relationship between people and organizations that are at both scales coming together under one structure to really get at the benefits of both national and local.
Well, I guess let's start there. What is a farmland common specifically? How is it's connected to the local community? And then how do you all connect that to sort of a national organization or support or a movement?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start. I'm sure I'll miss some things in the description, but really a farmland commons is relationship. And a farmland commons is a passionate, loving relationship for people and for land. So a farmland commons needs a handful of people, maybe 5 or so, and land, farmland. And both of those are critically needed. One without the other doesn't make farmland commons possible. So what it is at least one farm project, real estate, land, farmland, and 5 people or so who are willing to come together as incorporating board members of a nonprofit farmland commons. So that's going to look different from one place to the next. Who those people are, what organizations, what knowledge and experience they have and they bring to bear, what that farm's focus is, production potential, market capacity is going to look different, as it should, in one place to the next. So, you know, the people look different, the land looks different, the mission priorities look different, but it takes that farmland, it takes a handful of people. They come together in partnership with us or with other nonprofits, and they form a landholding affiliate entity. These farmland commons are all 501c2 or 501c25 landholding affiliate entities of nonprofits. So they have to be connected to an existing nonprofit entity, and then they're limited in scope. So those people, those 5 or so people who come together to incorporate the farmland commons entity, they're needing to be passionate about that land, about that farm, and they're needing to want to see the success and viability of that farm. And then they're needing to really understand that limited scope. The farmland commons is just an entity to acquire and hold title to farm real estate, steward and manage that real estate, and lease that real estate out to farmer. Farmer could be any type of enterprise, and we can come back to that in a minute. But really, that farmland commons is just that relationship of people who are coming together because they value farming and they value specifically a farm or multiple farms in a region. And they want to be the stewards of that holding structure and the stewards of that relationship with the farm enterprises that carry out. So we can be that nonprofit structure, the 501c3 that connects to these affiliated entities. We can be one of the nonprofit structures where there's many nonprofits that come together to form these landholding affiliates. Or we can just be a guide and support for existing nonprofits to create this structure. But in all cases, it's valuing certain things around stewardship, around agriculture, around land relationship, around equity and justice. And it's bringing those forward in a nonprofit structure to then hold title to farmland real estate and then convey out lease to farmer and maintain those relationships.
Yeah, so our work as the Farmers Land Trust is to create these farmland commons. And like Ian said, like we can be the nonprofit to hold that, but we don't have to be. So the C2, the 501c2 structure is a landholding affiliate that is connected to only one 501c3 parent. And then the 501c25 entity is connected to a minimum of 3 nonprofits or up to 30. So it could be many different nonprofits that come together. And we really are starting to lean into that model because it builds more resilience and it brings more support for the farmland and the farmers involved. So, more funding capacity, more technical assistance support, all of these other things that land farmers need. And I would love to share that we chose these legal entities for several reasons. We didn't create these. These are legal structures that have been around for a long time, that were created by the IRS, and other organizations and entities use them already, but for other purposes. We are just using them in a new and creative way to address farmland ownership being held in community and also this long-term security affordability for farmers. But, we didn't create these structures like the IRS did. And the reason that we chose these specifically for our use in these farmland commons is because they can be run by a board of people that are all local to place. And that is so important when you're talking about community ownership. So these farmland commons, these affiliate nonprofit landholding entities are all run by a board of people who are all local to that place. So that puts the ownership, the deed itself is held in that farmland commons that is managed by that board of people. And then on that board is the farmer. So whoever that leaseholder is gets a seat on the board, meaning that they have power and a voice in what happens to the land that they're a part of. When we were talking about the community land trust model or the conservation land trust, in any of those cases, the person who is stewarding the land is not on that board, so it's giving a voice to a farmer that we think is really important and valid as the people who are closest to and connected to that land. They should be the ones that have authority over that land. Another reason to choose these entities was because it is what can hold the land in community in perpetuity to save it and protect it, but also give farmers the most autonomy and independence on the land. And as farmers, we know that's what farmers want. They want long-term security and they want independence and they want to be able to do whatever they want to do in their day-to-day business operations. And unfortunately, in our culture, the only way we know how to talk about that right now is through private property. but there's another way. Like, this is another way. And these legal structures give people that. It gives them everything they want out of that private property ownership, while also bringing them a network of support and community. It's just, like, we've talked about all these crises around farmland and farmers, but like, we haven't talked about the fact that farming has one of the highest suicide rates. Like, farming is so lonely and it's so hard. Like, this crazy ideal we have of this nuclear family running a farm and like growing all their own food and doing all these things all by themselves, like, that is killing us. Like, we can't keep doing that. People are meant to live in community. People are meant to farm in community. And so how can we do all of this within the legal structures that exist today? And that is what we're doing with the Farmers Land Trust and the Farmland Commons. So the deed is held in this Farmland Commons, and then that farmer, steward, rancher gets this 99-year lease. So now this person, entity, what have you, has a 99-year affordable secure lease. And it is within that lease, it's that legal tool, which is the lease, that allows for all of the conservation language and all of the stewardship and how to be in relationship to land, and really gives that farmer that autonomy and independence and security on that land. And that can look so many different ways. We talked about like, oh, in our culture, we're always looking at the binary or the one answer. And this is another place where like, it can't just be one answer that solves all the problems. And so really, our work too is to figure out how to support land and farmers in creative ways. And a lot of times that looks like layering and nesting several different entities on top of one another. So maybe the Farmland Commons holds the land, but the lease could be to either an LLC or an individual or another nonprofit or a cooperative or another community land trust. Like, it can look so many different ways. And I think that that's really interesting too, because every farm, every farmer, every community, they're all in such different places and they have such different resources to bring to the table. And this model can plug in anywhere. And that's so cool.
So I just add too that, so this model, the Farmland Commons, is a nonprofit structure. It's a nonprofit landholding structure. We feel that is critically important because we hear from farmers and we read studies year after year that access to land is the number one barrier for so many farmers. Like, the financial burdens of accessing land or affording land debt or servicing that debt over a lifetime is crazy. So that leads exiting farmers to sell out to development simply to pay off debt. That leads new and beginning farmers to get on any land they can that's so far from markets or so degraded or so lacking in infrastructure, because that's all they can afford. Like, we can't treat farming and our stewardship and relationship with the earth and cultivating food as solely a financial enterprise and decision. It's much bigger than that. Like, and we can't do that any longer because there's so many pension funds, governments, wealthy people, financial institutions that treat farmland as an asset and nothing else. They're gobbling up more and more farmland as, we're in this massive transition of 400 million acres of farmland in this country is transitioning this generation. And so much of it is being acquired by those with wealth simply because they see it as a stable asset as so many other things collapse. So we're using this nonprofit structure because we feel that farmland should not be a market-based asset. We feel farmland should be a community resource. We feel farmland should be something we have a relationship with. We need to decommodify farmland. And in the structures we have, a nonprofit is a wonderful way to decommodify something. So holding land in a nonprofit is a great way to make farmland affordable, to make farmland decommodified, and to change our relationship and value to it. At the same time, like, we've seen enough nonprofit-run farms or nonprofit-owned farms to know that a nonprofit that has its own mission and own programmatic work or activities or budget considerations, a lot of times the farmer and the farming is on the short end of the stick there. farmer has to run educational community programs in addition to all their farming, or the farmer has a very tenuous relationship or no long-term security because the nonprofit may need to or decide to do something else with that land. We need to stop treating our relationship to cultivating land and food as a short-term endeavor. We need to think generationally on this. So setting limits for the nonprofit of what it can do is really important in our work. So that's why using these existing IRS structures, the 501c2 and the 501c25, the IRS itself has limited the scope of these structures. So these nonprofit structures that we use for the farmland commons can't step in and be the farming enterprise, can't step in and do other programmatic work that kind of either impacts or infringes upon the farmers' activities on the ground, or expands a budget so large that they have to think about selling off the land or doing something else with the land. That these nonprofits' sole purpose, according to IRS and in our work, is to hold title to real estate, to farmland, and then to manage and steward that. But anything and everything that happens on that farmland, on that farm, is done by the leaseholder, who has autonomy to do that because the nonprofit can't step in. There's the boundaries that are created in the structure itself.
Yeah, another reason to use this nonprofit structure is because it allows for philanthropic giving and for like grant sort of funding. And we just feel that is so necessary because of how out of touch with reality farmland prices are. Like, they're so astronomically high. And so to be able to move and transact land and to decommodify it into these structures, like, we have to be able to access philanthropic funding. And so the nonprofit structures allow for that. And, so Ian was just sharing like, oh, the nonprofit can't do this and the nonprofit can't do that. And that's what gives the farmer so much autonomy. But it's not just a drawback. It really is supportive. Like, there are so many nonprofits out there that are ag adjacent or ag supportive or in the organic regenerative farming industry in some way, like supporting farmers through technical assistance. And for so long now, I think that they've all been giving all these workshops and education and supports on land access. And now they're at a point where they're like, we actually want to do something about land access. And so as we shared, this farmland commons is something that we're not holding tightly ourselves. It's something that, yes, we're creating farmland commons as the Farmers Land Trust, but we're also supporting other organizations in creating these. And we're finding with the organizations that we're talking with and supporting around the country that they are very excited and motivated to be able to be part of this land access, land security for young and beginning farmers, or for disadvantaged farmers, or for, at this point, every farmer is. But they're excited to get to be part of this in the way of having this affiliate farmland commons entity being associated with them. And they are thrilled that it's not going to take a bunch of their overhead capacity, or that they're not going to have to engage in programmatic work. Like, it really allows other nonprofits to be able to engage in this land legacy, in this land protection, in this land access work without taking too much from their existing capacity and work. And so that is actually like a really positive aspect to a lot of people.
That brings to the forefront this flaw in our idea that ownership is protection against forces like that, when it seems to me to actually be the other way around, because of the overwhelming market forces that are applied to farmland now, especially close to market centers where you want ostensibly farms feeding people. One of the things when we think about leasing, though, is building long-term equity. Is that something that you all could talk some about?
There are equity building components to this, and would love to share all about those and talk more about those. But at the end of the day, this model, the farmland commons model that we are doing, is decommodifying land. It's taking land out of private ownership. It's placing it into community ownership so that it can never be bought and sold again. And that is what we're doing. There are 400 million acres of land in transition in the next decade. Like, there is so much land that is going to change hand, and we need a lot of models and different ways of going about this. So we are just one of many. And if private ownership is what people are after, like, this is not for them. Like, this is not this is not going to work for them. And I totally understand why some people will want that and need that, and why this won't work for them, because this country is built on the vehicle for wealth building being land. And so people and cultures who have been purposefully and violently kept from land ownership and access, like, they may want private ownership, and totally understand that. So that is all to say, like, yes, you are never going to be able to sell this land and make a killing off of it. Like, that is, if that's what you're into, like, this is not for you. But the equity building components are there, and would love to share more about those, but I'll let you into that.
All right, real quick, let's take a moment to hear from this episode's sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Harnois Greenhouses. For over 55 years, Harnois Greenhouses have led the way in controlled environment agricultural innovation, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver comprehensive commercial greenhouse solutions. Their mission's clear and steadfast to pioneer a greener, more resilient future for agriculture. At the heart of their success is a commitment to their community of producers with extensive expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnois Greenhouses provides the best greenhouse solution for the grower across North America. Their greenhouses are engineered to face any North American climate, ensuring unparalleled brightness, agronomic performance, faster ROI, and lasting durability. They're not just building greenhouses, they're creating energy-efficient ecosystems that promote sustainable and profitable agriculture. With over 20,000 projects to their name, they're more than a manufacturer, they're a partner. From the initial design to the final installation, Harnois Greenhouses is with you every step of the way, guaranteeing your success. Harnois Greenhouses, a leader in turnkey solutions for local growers. Visit their link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to the show.
Before sharing about those equity components, a few kind of pieces of framework to think in that private property ownership versus community commons ownership is that in private property ownership, and unless you are wealthy, the bank is holding title to your property. And in any farm crisis in this country, we only have to look to see the number of farm foreclosures that happened forced by banks who kick farmers off their farms because they simply can't make the monthly mortgage payment. Like, private property does not ensure that a bank, it does not ensure that the town or county you pay property taxes to won't foreclose or take your property in some way. And for many people of color, private property, you are still victimized by swindlers who are stealing your property through, now the latest scheme is heirs properties right, to fracture that heirs property ownership structure and to find a way in to force a sale. So, private property is framed as a solution, and it's framed as the solution since, we sent pioneers out in wagons to practice genocide on the land and on the people that live there. And it's never been the truth, but that's been the narrative that's been put forward. In so many other business sectors, it's a normal decision to make whether to own or to lease the real estate. And they look at their financial reality and they make a decision. It's not possible or not easily possible in agriculture, because in agriculture, you're building permanent infrastructure, you're improving the soil. So staying in one place is important for that. But simply private property does not solve that. Long-term security solves that. So for us, the farmland commons model, providing long-term security through a lease, is a way to provide affordability. It's a way to provide security for the farm business. And then it's a way to build in other values. So things like equity and ways to build equity can be baked into the lease itself. So just like many other business sectors who lease real estate all the time, that's a standard consideration for so many other business sectors, that if they lease real estate and they build a building or they build infrastructure or they retrofit a restaurant, like, they own all that stuff. That is their equity. And we have not allowed that opportunity for farmers in the way that most of the rest of commercial real estate operates in this country. So what we do with this model, the farmland commons, is we say, farmer, when you're using your capital to build infrastructure, buildings, improvements on this real estate, that is yours. That is your equity that you're building there. When you invest in that, that is something that you own, just like the rest of your business assets. So you could own the barn. You could own the capital needed to create waterways or roadways or fenceways. Like, those are assets that are on your balance sheet. The only thing we're saying is the real estate is not an asset on your balance sheet, because the real estate land should not be treated in that way. But everything else you're investing and creating is an asset of your business. And when you exit your business, you can sell that, or you can pass that on to the next generation. Like, just like you can your inventory, your customer list, your equipment, all these other assets of your business. These two are your assets. We're solely separating out that land and saying that should not be a personal asset for people.
It's very similar to a ground lease that is used by community land trusts. And so I shared, like, we have based this a lot off of the community land trust model. And so how that operates is that the community land trust owns the land, and then anything on top of the land is owned by the leaseholder. So, like, they lease the land, but they own anything above. So in the farmland commons, it can go different ways. Like, the farmland commons, that, nonprofit landholding entity could own just the land, and then the leaseholder owns anything on top of the land. So any housing, any barns, any infrastructure, and then also anything that they were to build themselves on top of land. Like, if they build any other infrastructure, or even just improvements in existing infrastructure, like, that should be money that they're able to take out after.
And back to that, we're stuck thinking everything is a binary choice. Like, a viable farm is a mosaic of different agreements to use land, to own land, to use, share equipment. Like, this is no different from, like, what are those land real estate assets that are best held in a nonprofit community commons? Those are going to be some, and they're going to differ from one farm to the next. But in the same regard, what are those assets that should be owned privately? And those are going to be some. And really, it should be a mosaic of both of them. Like, the farmer needs to own certain things privately. And the farmer, would be better off in many cases holding lease tenure in other assets. Like, for me in New England, like, I'm seeing the end of the dairy industry. Like, there's been one new dairy in the last 20 years in the county I live. Every other dairy is closed. There's a few left, but there's very few new and beginning dairies. And we're have very liberal laws around raw milk sales. So, like, it's supportive. There's local markets for milk. Like, we have very strong CSA and, like, customer farm distance to market and relationships that exist here in New Hampshire, but dairy is failing in New England, and it's likely not going to be here in a decade or two, if at all, unless we take another approach. The reality is land is too expensive, infrastructure is too expensive for the finances of a dairy farm to sustain that. Maybe dairy farms should be owned in a nonprofit structure to make them financially viable for farms to continue here in New England.
I just want to go back to, because Jackson, you were like, yeah, when farmers hear of lease, like, they're kind of thrown off. And yeah, I mean, it is such an interesting thing, because that is the legal tool. Like, we are trying to figure out how to hold and be in relationship to land in new ways, but we do have to work within the system that we all live in, because turns out burning it down is not an option. So working within the system that we're in, and the lease is the legal tool, but it acts so differently than a market-based lease. Like, we're talking about 99 years. And the reason that we can only go 99 years is because that is what state law will allow. If we could go longer, we would do longer. But state law is 99 years in some places. In some places, it's actually shorter than that. But, so we're talking about a long-term lease. We're not talking about year to year or even 5 years. We're talking long-term. And then, of course, the lease terms themselves are negotiated by that commons board that the farmer is a part of. So they are part of negotiating and creating their own lease terms, including the lease rate. So, like, how much they want to pay each year. And oftentimes that is just the cost of taxes and insurance, which, are outside of the farmland commons. Like, they can't change anything about what the land taxes are, and those have to be paid. So the cost of those. But then beyond that, it's like, what is comfortable for the farmer? Like, what meets them where they are at? And then that lease revenue does not go to some absentee landowner. That lease revenue goes right back into that farm and that land and supporting that farmer. So anything that they pay in is just going to go back to supporting them. And so it's all very different. Like, yes, we have to say the word lease because at the end of the day, that is the legal tool we're using, but it doesn't have to be the status quo thinking process of like what you would get charged to rent an apartment. Like, it's so different. Like, we are doing creative things. We're doing this innovatively, and like they get to be a part of that creation of that. Like, we do have templates, like we have these legal template documents that is a baseline for starting, but it is just that. It's just a starting point. And then that local farmland commons takes it and makes it into what they want it to be.
I think that's a big part too. So many people hear lease and they think, I'm sure all of us here, the three of us and all of us listening, have stories of awful landlords who like didn't respond, charged X, X, Y, and Z, why this landlord was horrific to work with. There's plenty of awful landlords out there. But when you start to explain this structure that, yes, it is a lease, but you are part of you as leaseholder are part of the entity that is conveying that lease. You're part of that common structure. And the other part of that common structure is other community stakeholders who are solely there because they want to see your farm and this farmland succeed as a community asset. Like it changes that paradigm of who the landlord is. So, maybe it's less about the lease and our perspective of what a lease is, and it's more about who's that landlord? Who's the one writing the lease or controlling the lease or kind of dictating the lease? When that changes, and that is us, it can be quite different.
Yeah. And I mean, I love what you're saying, Ian, too, of like, oh, those people on the board with the farmer get to help, they're there just to support the farmer. And that is totally true. But just in case, also baked in within the lease template document is that no decisions can be voted on and passed unless the farmer is in the voting of yes. Like, we have baked into this lease so much, okay, that's another thing I was about to say. We've baked in so much equity for the farmer. And like, we talk about equity. We just talked about equity as like a resource, money that you get to pull out, but also equity can be used as fairness, justness. And that's how I'm talking about it now, is that we've built in equity for the farmer in the way that decisions can't be made without them voting yes to, or like they're not going to be outvoted by the rest of the board just in case. Like, we have to protect the farmer. Like, at the end of the day, that is what we are here to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's not something that I would have envisioned in any other lease arrangement. When I think about the work that I do to invest and build up farmland, or the work that I'm doing feeding my community, it's more a matter of, in the past, before I got into farming, I thought that the way that I ensure that work proceed or continue on post my being a farmer was through ownership. But really, there is another way. And even when we talk about the word lease, this structure still provides a way for the work that I begin, say if I were starting a farm commons. In some circumstances, it seems like it would be more secure that my work would be perpetrated into the future as opposed to an ownership model, especially when we get into things like leaving a farm to my children. It may be that none of them want to become farmers. I also want them to be free to make decisions about their life and what they would like to do that are not tied to any sort of obligation or work that I am doing. If it's farming that they would want to do, I want to provide that avenue and that method and that lifestyle for them. It's not something that I want to be a burden. And I feel like this particular model opens up avenues for both of those to happen at the same time. It can perpetuate the work that I begin today into the future, which is what I would like to see. But it also provides my children a way to be free of the burden of that ownership in the future, and also free to participate, given that's something that they would like to do.
Yeah, fully. That, the farmland commons as a group of people sharing a relationship, those relationships are based on shared values. So that's not always the case in a family. There's certain things that connect family members generationally together, but it's not always values around organic agriculture. These farmland commons come together because of their shared belief around organic, regenerative, biodynamic agriculture. And new members would come on to a commons because of that value alignment. So you're building a community of value-aligned people who are holding their responsibility of stewarding and holding this land long into the future. And because we're all temporary and we will pass and new generations come forward, like there's little that's guaranteed, if anything. But through relationships and through kind of multiple people holding the same relationships and values, we can build something that's much more longer lasting than ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, and also this lease, like the farmer, steward, rancher gets this long-term lease, and that can be passed on to their children. And it is so interesting because people so often are like, well, I need to maintain ownership of this land so that I can give it to my children. Well, if your children are going to farm, then they can do that in this model too. Like you can have the 99-year lease that gets passed on to their children if they want to farm it. The thing is, like people who want to pass their land on to their children, if they don't want to farm, then what are you actually passing on to them? You're passing on to them a vehicle to be sold to make them a bunch of money that then that land gets developed. Like the realization of these astronomical prices for farmland are only realized once you sell it to development, and then the land is ruined and lost from agriculture. So it's so fascinating when I hear people be like, I need to keep ownership in case my children want to farm. It's like, no, if it's in case your children want to farm, then put it in the farmland commons, because if you are not worried about your children selling the land to development, we need to think longer and bigger. Like, what about their children's children's children? Like, what are they going to do with this land? Like, where's our food going to come from many years from now, many generations from now?
I have two boys too who like they can't even agree on dinner sometimes, or like they fight about like each other's hair or clothes or what they're doing. Like, kids and siblings. I have a brother and sister myself. We get along, but certain things we don't get along on. Like leaving something to your kids where there's multiple kids who then have to decide on future of land and legacy of parents who are now deceased is such a burden in most cases. And it's not realistic to think like after we pass, our kids are going to come together, share values, and carry forward what we started on the land. Like that's an extremely rare reality.
Yeah, we as the Farmers Land Trust are making farmland commons. And yeah, we are helping and guiding and supporting other communities, other farmers, other people, other landowners, and doing that by bringing whatever they're missing to the piece, whether that be legal support or fundraising or real estate support, but also we have these template documents. Clearly, we think land should be held in common, but also resources should be held in common and knowledge should be accessible to everyone. So we have these template documents and they are available for anyone to use. Like you don't have to talk to us ever. We don't have to be involved. We don't have to have power or authority in your legal structure or within your land. Like you could just use all the templates, which are bylaws for how to start the nonprofit entity, the lease template, like everything, a farm management plan, like everything you would need to create a farmland commons on your own within your own community to hold land in community to ensure affordability and accessibility for farmers. Like it's all yours, open resource, take it, do it. Like it's just so clear. Like we very much want to see a big shift and a big change in how land is held and accessed in this country. And we cannot make that happen. And we cannot see that into the future if we are trying to do it all ourselves. Like that's just not possible. So we want everyone to feel like they can do this on their own. Like take it, run with it, do it.
So there's probably a couple different things that we could share more on. Like one I want to touch on now is this work, kind of land ownership, land commoning, land relationship is so deeply personal for so many people. Like we find ourselves having conversations that we were initially part of years ago or decade ago plus, and are only coming back around now. Like it's a long-term decision for people to let go of those stories, let go of those myths, let go of that identity of private property and the farm and themselves being tied to that. Like it's not easy. It's very challenging. It's embedded in 500 plus years of colonist capitalism that exists and has created these stories and ideals that we strive to live into one way or another. Like it's long-term letting go and opening up to something new that really is old. It's something that has existed for thousands of years before present state of times, and yet it's new for so many people to be okay. Be okay in the new, be okay in the not holding and possessing things, be okay in the strength of relationships and trust, and not simply what shows up on balance sheet. So it's challenging work, but we recognize that, and we're both here to engage in that and to engage in those slow, personal conversations with people around transition. And we recognize and call that forward that for so many farmers out there that are lacking land security and are watching farms close and watching land be sold off for development, there's exiting farmers who are crying over that, who would have loved to have conversation and connect with new generation before it got to that final stage of the for sale sign going up or the need for money because of some crisis. Like, start generational conversations now, build relationship now, and connect on that piece for the future of what the land could be.
We get asked all the time, like we talk to young farmers, we talk to new farmers and like also this buzzword, like every organization is like land access, but it's like land transition. Like, how do we solve land access for the people who don't own or have access to land? Is like, there are so many people who do own land. Like, that's who we should be talking to. And all the time we have and are talking to young farmers who are like, oh, all the land on the market is so expensive. All the land on the market is so expensive. And over again, we're telling them, don't look for land on the market. So if you're listening and you're a farmer and you're looking for land, like, stop looking on the market. If it's on the market, then the seller already has an expectation of the amount of money that they want to get. And there is no way that you're going to be able to compete with these market prices and with how quickly money and land transact. And so what we suggest to people to do is start thinking about where you want to be and what kind of land that you want to have access and security to, and start talking to the people who own that land, because maybe they are wanting to transition it. Maybe they are willing to give a long-term, secure, affordable lease, in which case you could just use our template lease. Like, there are people who are interested in new models, but they don't know what they are. They don't know what the options are. And maybe they are genuinely just waiting for you to knock on their door and talk to them about it.
If people are interested in specifically what you're doing or the resources that you have available, how do they contact you? Where do they go to make sure that they can follow up with this conversation?
Yeah, thanks. Definitely our website, thefarmerslandtrust.org, and they can sign up for our newsletter at the very bottom in the footer. And also follow us on your favorite social media. Obviously, we're on Facebook and Instagram, but we're also on LinkedIn and X, I guess is the new name, but also TikTok. Follow us everywhere you're at. We are too.
Yeah, and I'll put links to everything down in the notes so that you can just scroll to the bottom while you're listening to this and click on anything that sounds of interest to you. Ian, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, reach out. Like, on our website is our contact information. We're really honored and inspired to have conversations with people, to hear where they're at, what they're wondering about, what they're struggling with, where they'd like to go with their land journey, their farm activities. Like, we really learn from and continue to build our work from the conversations we have. So reach out to us with questions, reach out wanting to know more, reach out to invite us to speak to your community or present to an organization you're part of. Like, really, how do we raise awareness for a new way, an ancient way of connecting to land, that's through stories. So any way that you can amplify or replicate or expand the stories that are told, we're grateful for.
Absolutely huge thank you to Ian and Kristina. Isn't the work that they are doing incredible? If you want to learn more, again, go to farmerslandtrust.org. The link is also down in the show notes. Shout out to Willie Houston and the Dr. Professor himself, Michael Sellis, for the theme music and amazing post-production, respectively. No-Till Growers for producing Collab Farm. You amazing collaborators out there. If you have guest recommendations for this podcast, you can reach out on Instagram at Collaborative Farming, or send us a guest recommendation through our website at no-tillgrowers.com. And as always, remember, many hands make light work. This is going at the end of the episode. After the credits roll, after the official goodbye, what is on Kristina's heart?
Here's the thing. I have a 4-year-old, and he's very into Spider-Man. Very into being the superhero, to like go fight crime and like help people in need. And it has really reminded me of how when I was a child, I very much wanted to be a Power Ranger. And I was very into that idea of being the superhero and helping people who were in need. And then as I grew out of the superhero mindset, then I thought, oh, for sure, I'm going to be a police officer because they help people. Like, I remember thinking that as a child. And, I think that everybody must have had that. Like, everybody must have had a moment in their childhood where they looked up to or pretended to be or wished they could be or thought they were going to be a superhero in some kind. And I just wonder where that went, and like really want to encourage people to remember that feeling and to know that they can still be that. They can still be that person to help people and be part of big change that people need. Like, if you own land, if you give that land to someone who can grow food and have an equitable, viable farming business to build soil to help mitigate the climate collapse and to help feed people in their local communities, like that is transformational. Like, that is the biggest act of superheroism that I can think of in the adult sort of way. And I just really want to encourage people to know, like, yeah, that era of your childhood might be over, but you still have that power. Like, you can still be that superhero for someone.
And giving gifts. And also like redefining what the word investment means. Just to be personal, I mean, I'm getting to a point in my life, my oldest is 10. I'm thinking of, I need to think about the future and what's going to be left of them. I've not done a good job of it up to this point, but then I'm also redefining, like, okay, what is investment? Is that a 401k? Is that land? Is that me investing in projects in the community that they're going to benefit from? Broadening this term of what we think for investing in the future.
Yeah, but like you're talking about, like, investment doesn't have to be just dollars. It can be like an investment into climate mitigation. Like, it can be an investment into food accessibility for the future generations. Like, it can look so many different ways. And if we are thinking in terms of dollars, like, what dollar amount are we like, okay, our children are secure now? Like, is that like $50,000? Or are we like, we need 500,000, or is it more? Like, where is that? Like, that would never end. We would never feel like we had enough dollars. Like, we need to change our thinking, because this thinking that we have been living in, that we clearly are on the path to not a good place. Like, we need to do something different.
Thank you both for sharing, and to share some myself. But one, so my wife and I, a number of years ago now, had started investment accounts for both of our kids at a community loan fund that has a farm food initiative in New Hampshire, and then at a national RSF social finance that has a focus on biodynamic ag and Waldorf education and women-led land-based businesses. So we invested with them, and then we targeted towards those things. And the return on investment is financially is very small compared to what it could be elsewhere. But the beautiful thing is like the quarterly and annual newsletters that come out that talk about what those investments are doing, and like the farms, the schools, the people that are benefiting from those, like for our kids to read those and see that their money is doing that is really a wonderful learning and powerful inspiration piece that we see. So that's something we do that helps. That's something we, the Farmers Land Trust, and in our work, some of the time we depend upon socially aligned lenders to help with bridge financing or investment in different needs. So those lenders who do not use the land as collateral and look for more community-based ways are really so necessary to this work and to farming in general. So finding ways to support them and be part of those communities are really great and important. For me, I guess I struggle with the balance. It's like what's on my heart is like on one hand, the climate collapse and watching our weather go from midwinter snow and 15 degrees to 55 degrees the next day and mud, and it feels like spring, and the birds and the insects and the buds are just begin to emerge after a few days of that, and then it's blanketed in snow again. So just the climate collapse, it breaks my heart. And knowing where we're going in that direction, it's horrific to think about. So that, and like war and genocide that's happening around the world breaks my heart. And it's like, those things consume me, but how to like keep those aside or keep those on the outside sometimes is the balance I try to engage in. So, the balance, what's on my heart is like, the conversations that Kristina and I get to have with landowners, with farmers, with community groups that are like needing a new model, like hungry for a new model, like just reached out to us because they see the need for this and want to move in this direction. And so to like get into a deep personal relationship with these people to talk about and create the future for land that they're holding or for farm enterprises that they lead, like, is such a beautiful and humbling experience. And it like enlivens me every day, and it helps that balance.